Right, in this session today we're going to be looking at setting out and cutting quite a basic half lap joint. I'm going to show you how to set it out in two different ways, and then how to cut the joint in two different ways. So you've got at least two different options, and you can pick which one best suits you when you're doing the joint again. So the first thing is we're going to set out the actual length of the joint on both pieces. Now what I'm going to do first is put the face side face edge mark on the timber, because when we're manufacturing joinery products we need the face side face edge mark so we know that which way the product's facing in on the actual joints that we're doing. So I'm going to just basically put the face side mark on the face of the timber and the face edge mark on the edge of the timber. I'm going to do that on both my pieces and they're ready to go. And then basically the face side face edge is going to face in on both pieces. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark out the actual length of the half lap joint, which when we're marking the length out, the length of the half lap joint is actually the same as the width of the timber, so the widest part of the timber, not the actual thickness. So I'm going to measure the timber, which I've pre-machined this so I already know its measurement, but it's actually 40 millimeters. So then I'm going to transfer that from the end of the timber using the rule, get the rule in line with the end, and I'm just going to put a little mark next to the 40. I'm then going to use a tri-square. I'm going to square this across the face of the timber. So I've squared that across on one piece. We can do that onto both pieces, but I'm just going to show you one way first and then the other way second. Now because this is a half lap, I've then got to transfer it halfway down both the edges in line with the line. So I'm going to transfer that across one edge first, roughly halfway. Even if we go a little bit further it's not a problem as long as it has gone halfway. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So that now I've set out the length of the joint and I've set out the width of the joint, how deep it's going. I've got to come back and do something different with that a little bit later, but first I'm going to show you the other method of how to set the other one out. Now the other method, instead of using a steel rule to measure, we can actually use the width of the timber to put it on and put a line on to mark it out, because we're actually doing the length of the joint the same width as the timber. So I'm going to lay that on there and put a little mark on. So I'm just going to put it on the edge. I'm going to check it's flush all the way along, and I'm just going to put one mark. It's not good practice to just draw all the way across because we're not guaranteeing it's square. So we're just putting a one little mark for the length, and then I'm going to use a tri-square again to mark that line across. So I'm marking that all the way across the face and halfway or slightly beyond halfway across both edges. So that's both my pieces marked out for length. Now I'm going to use a tool that's called a marking gauge to gauge the width of the joint across both edges and across the end of the timber. Now my timber I know is 28 millimeters. I'm just going to check it with a steel rule. That's 28. So we're going to half 28 and we're going to set the gauge to 14 millimeters. So we adjust the little screw on there, so we loosen it so it can slide, and now we're going to set that so it's at 14 millimeters to the point, and we just nip it. Once we've nipped it up we need to check it again because sometimes it moves along on the gauge slightly, so I've checked that's 14. So I'm going to gauge this now. Now a way to check it is still in the center. We can just put it on the edge of the timber and we're just going to rotate it and put the gauge in so it just puts a little point into the timber from that side, and then I'm going to rotate it round and try it from the other side, and the point, if we've done it right, the point should go in the same hole, which it does. Now you can do this freehand around the edge, or you can use a vise, which is a little bit safer and a little bit easier when you're starting out. So I'm going to go from the face side of the timber. I'm actually going to mark across the face of the timber with a gauge, nice light pressure on the point and all the pressure on the side of the gauge. I'm then going to go across the end grain and then I'm going to flip it over to face me and do the last part. Now a lot of the time you actually can't see the line with the grain because of the colour of the grain, so we get a real sharp pencil and we're basically just going to stick it in the gauge mark we've got and draw down, and then we can see the line a lot clearer. So I'm going to draw that across both edges and the end grain. Okay, so now we've set both parts of the half lap out. Again, as I showed you two slightly different methods of setting out. I'm actually going to show you two slightly different methods of cutting. They both achieve the same end outcome, but they are two slightly different methods that different joiners will use in the trade. Now the first one that I'm going to show you is the one that I use. And instead of actually putting the timber to do the vertical cut in the vice vertical, I actually put it over at roughly 45 degrees. The reason for that is it's easier to follow both lines because both lines are more visible instead of the saw hiding one of the lines when we're cutting. So I'm going to cut this with a brass back tenon saw. So yet again, when we're holding the saw, we're going to hold our finger down the side of the saw to guide it, and when we're cutting with our arms straight through, so it's similar to playing pool, so we've got a nice straight arm action with the saw forward. You're not going to be able to quite see that from the angle we're filming this at, but this is the kind of action that we're going to use. So I'm going to start and I'm cutting into the waste piece. So I've marked the waste piece with a cross, the piece we're taking out, and I'm actually cutting into that, so I'm cutting to the right hand side of the gauge mark. I'm going to start off by putting my thumb up in the air to guide the edge of the saw, but my thumb's away from the teeth. I'm just going to start off nice and gentle and just make sure I'm alongside the gauge mark. I'm just going to use all the saw, vibrating a little bit, so I'm just going to lower it in the vise. So I'm cutting and I'm following both lines at the same time, across at 45 degrees. I'm just going to make sure on this side I don't cut any further than the line. On the far side I can actually cut past the line, but it's on this side I need to make sure I don't cut beyond it. So once I've done that, what I've basically done is cut through the top half of that section there. So I've cut through 45 degrees of it. I'm then going to rotate it over in the vise, and this time I've already got a saw cut that my actual line will follow. So I'm going to put the saw into the saw cut like so, and then all I've got to do is lower the back edge down. And I'm just going to cut back to the line here again. Make sure I'm not cutting beyond the line. So what I've now done, I've cut through both sides at 45, so I have a little triangle I've got to cut out that's left in the bottom. So to do this, I actually put it vertical in the vise, and then with light pressure on the saw itself will actually follow both the previous saw cut. So I don't really need to guide the saw at all. I just need to keep checking both sides, looking over to make sure I'm not cutting beyond the line. So that's that face cut. What I'm going to do then, to do the shoulder cut, I'm going to use a tool that's called a bench hook. I'm going to put this into the vise. Now we have on the bench hook, one side of it's right-handed, so I'm cutting to the right, and the other side is left-handed, so I'm cutting to the left. So if you're left or right-handed, you need to select the correct side. I'm then simply going to put the timber on the bench hook, and I'm going to do the vertical shoulder cut. So I'm going to clamp that with my hand, thumb up in the air, nice and straight with my arm, so my arm's through. I'm then going to just start off next to the line, into the waste piece. Make sure that I'm not cutting too far down. I'm going to check both sides as I'm doing it. Keep the saw horizontal, so we're not cutting at an angle anywhere, and that section should just fall off. And then that's one part of the half lap done. The other method I'm going to show you is by just putting it in the vice vertical to start with. So we haven't got the 3 actions that we've got because we've cut that 3 times when we've done it. We're just going to have 1 action. So it's put it in the vice vertical. This is the section we're cutting off, so that's the waste bit. And I'm just going to start with the saw up in the edge on the far corner, next to my line, and I'm just going to lower it across so we've cut across. Once we've cut all the way across, all I'm doing now is keeping the saw vertical and following the vertical line. Yet again, when I get near to the line, I need to check over to make sure I'm not cutting too far. Same again, bench hook. So I've done all of the vertical cut. So I've just got to do the shoulder cut now. So saw up in the air, just start it off nice and gently next to the line, lower it in, and just ensure I'm cutting vertically. So I've cut both sections off. Left in, so I'm just going to cut the shoulder slightly deeper with a tenon saw, not excessive. Now there are a couple of ways we can do this. If the grain is straight down here, we can actually put the chisel, so we've got a bevel edge chisel, we can put it in the gauge mark there and chisel straight down. If the grain's going at an angle, it's actually going to take more out than we need because it would follow the grain. So a fail-safe method is for us to go across at 45 degrees, and it actually helps it stop us taking too much out. So I'm just going to start, I'm only taking a slight bit. Now basically if we put the chisel across and we hold the chisel flat, it won't cut. If we lift it up, it will cut a bit off. If we lift it too much, it's going to cut too much off. So it's about keeping it flat for a start and just lifting it up just so it starts to cut. So I'm going to go across, and this will just take it off just like a knife. So we're just going to go across the joint a little bit at a time, carefully, and I'm going to work back towards the shoulder. I'm just going to cut this off gently. So it's about keeping the chisel nice and flat and just lifting it just so it cuts. You can see the shavings that are coming off are quite thin, not too thick. Now we can leave this in the vise once we've done and cleaned this out and made sure it's flat. We can leave this in the vise so that we can check it without taking it out of the vise. Now if you look, that's very much nearly there. We just need a little bit more out of it. So I'm just going to go again. And it's about making sure that we're going across nice and flat and we're taking it off evenly all the way down. Now the gauge mark we've put on will guide us with that. You see that one was even thinner, and we're looking now that we're nearly flat. We want a little bit. Now looking at that, we've taken enough off this one, so I'm just going to take the second one down again to the gauge mark. So yet again I've just need to cut the shoulder slightly deeper, and we're just going to start again on the corner. I'm going to work across gently. Then we end up with a half lap joint that goes together like so.